to make sure you understood what we have been doing, which I was not quite convinced of this. So let's make sure we understand the complexity of what's going on in a way that hopefully will make you a better human being. Okay. In the rhizome and refrain, in that section of Deleuze and Guattari, you know there are 6 aspects that you've now memorized. The important thing to understand about this is that a surface, when you think of a surface, think of any surface, your canvases, when you project light, when you are making a play, anything that resembles this kind of thing of a surface, anything that allows something to be let's say, projected outward and to be able to make something make sense, to enable the sensibility of something. There's 2 things you need to take away from this, from last session, which I wasn't sure you got. The first one was that a surface has a plurality to it. By plurality, you think about that when you close your eyes and you think about this thing called a surface, this sort of flat plane. The plane, which we will also in parentheses write plane of immanence, I-M-M-A-N-E-N-C-E, plane of immanence. When this surface happens, it might, on some level analytically, in your mind, in your logic, think that that is a solid structure of some kind, even if it's very thin. But actually, it's a multiplicity, or what we were calling last week a heterogeneity. Do you remember that bit? So rather than it being this sort of flat process, it was a heterogeneic moment. And do you remember with the water being thrown and the spots going everywhere? Remember that part? Good. And that the different edges of the spots were all part of that plane of immanence. So you could say that a narrative, let's say we're talking about a story, Little Red Riding Hood. Sadly, the first story that pops in my mind. You know, there's different parts of this story. What's the surface? If you were to try and understand this as having a surface, what would that be? What would the surface structure of Little Red Riding Hood be? Maybe that's too hard a question.
Traveling, going from one point to another.
So how do you understand surface there?
Don't speak to
Directions.
strangers.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, let's look at the painting behind Dorota. What's the surface of that painting?
Physical?
No.
No.
I'm asking you the question. You can't come back with a question. That's not fair. You have to put it slightly differently, the answer to that question, what's the surface of that painting, is the same answer to what's the surface of Little Red Riding Hood. Now, if you're thinking to yourself that a surface is a plane type of a plane, P-L-A-N-E, as opposed to an interesting, a plane, an immanent plane, then I'm asking you to try and think about this plane as having lots of parts to it. The parts are not like literally the paint strokes and the narrative that's going on in that and the way in which it's composed on the canvas. The surface is all of that. They're not discrete entities. I'm thinking now of James's piece that he did on the walls and the way in which it was bouncing off of everything. The surface of the work was James's voice, was what he was reading, was the lights on the walls, were the curves of the ceiling. All of that came together to make this have meaning. Now, yesterday, Mattia and I were having a fun and exciting PhD meeting. Went on for, yeah, come on in.
Johnny, we've got a chair. Do you want us to leave it outside?
Oh, no, bring the chair in.
Squeeze.
Thank you.
Give me way in with it.
That's brilliant. Okay. Thank you so much.
Where are we going to put it?
Just there.
Will that be all right there? There's an envelope on there for it's Professor Johnny Golding. Ah, that's Stuart.
That's me.
Right, okay, that's your chair as well then.
And
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you. I love our lives. So Tom, can you sit in that chair and tell me if it's comfortable?
Oh, that's nice.
Is it?
It is.
Oh, great.
Can I stand it?
Yeah. It's a new home. Okay, that'll be the fun chair that everybody gets. You're not going to fall backwards, right? It does.
No,
Okay. It's my eBay thing. Great. Okay. Think about this. Reconnect. Think about this thing called the surface, and in the surface that it's got a heterogeneous sense of space, of place. And what I was saying that Mattia and I met yesterday, and he was sitting in my London studio in the office there, and there's a lot of little things around. And can you explain what you saw? Because that was also the surface of the office. And it's not just, it's similar to this here.
Yeah, there were a number of things completely indeed heterogeneous, disparate. Book titles, book cover design, objects, photographs, the style of the furniture, so things that you wouldn't necessarily think of being next to each other to build a meaning. But all together gave me a feeling that reminded me of a theatre show I saw that was playing on the Laboratory of Faust's at the beginning of the onset of science, so magic and science, curiosity and mystery are completely tied together. But when I tried to describe what was giving me this feeling, it sounded rather sort of banal, or rather it was breaking that feeling. Because I said, well, it is the title of this book, and it is that cover, and it is the color of the bookshelves over there, and the fact that the room is small.
There's a drum kit in there.
Yeah, but the sum of all these elements was not enough to create the feeling. The feeling was something that existed in the relations of all these elements.
So let's look at this room here. It's fair to say that not everything that's in this room would necessarily be thought to be in this room, right? Including the chair that just showed up, sort of dropped in. It was perfect. So another thing spored in from out there, and just ended up on the surface of what is our seminar room. So to say that this is not inside the room, to say that you are enveloped in a surface which is giving you a sense of philosophy, let's say, or a sense of art, or a sense of something. You come in the room and the lights get changed and you see the flag, but it's not really a flag, and there's a dancer's costume, but it's not really, but it's really an art piece that someone made. You see these books, some of them existence pops out. Karl Marx is sitting there. There's also a teddy bear. There's and the teddy bear, by the way, was a teddy bear of a colleague of mine who used to keep this on her computer this is about 20 years ago when I taught at Greenwich, 15 years ago, and she died suddenly, and she had apparently given me, which I didn't know this, the teddy bear. So now I share something with you that you didn't really know. You had no understanding of what that little tiny teddy bear sitting next to Karl Marx is about. But so I know, for example, something extra about that. And the question is, do these objects in the room create an aura? Well, yes, they do. They create some kind of energy that, taken together, create the surface. So there's these heterogeneous moments that are happening that happen in this room. And you could have something similar happen in your own studio. It might not look quite as, crazy as this desk, for example. But we know that on this desk, it all makes sense that everything's here, except it doesn't really make any sense. But it's not surprising that it's here. Nobody thinks, that shouldn't be here. I mean, I think the people that walked into the room thought, what is this? Okay, you know, but apart from that, I'm trying to get you to understand that the surface is not inside and it's not outside. It holds something. And the something it's holding includes you all, includes the camera, includes innate and sentient beings, includes all of that. And they've spored in. You've come in from wherever you've come. Sometimes you're here, sometimes you're not here. Nobody feels that they don't belong here. Or anyway, I hope you don't feel that you don't belong here. And at the same time, everybody's kind of quietly themselves. So you're all creating this moment of a surface, which has got a heterogeneic aspect, but it also forms the environment, let's say. Maybe it would help if we called it environment to start with, or atmosphere. These are all surfaces. Now, the question I asked you to consider is, what purchase do you get by calling it a surface? If you call it an atmosphere, or you call it an environment, you call it a landscape, what's useful about understanding it as a surface?
Is it like more tactile?
That's nice. Maybe.
Is it because it makes sense?
Yes, because the surface acts as what? Famous word.
Ground.
Ground. Yes, so the surface is the groundless ground. So can you see now that we're sitting in a room with all these things surrounding us, and this is the surface of Untimely Meditations, which can change next week, in fact will, because in Untimely Meditations, when it starts at 2:15 or 2:30 or whatever it starts, at 2:30, will not be dark. So maybe that'll be a weirder version. It'll be an off version. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
It's a bit I find difficult about it is it strikes me we're trying to sort of capture this heterogeneity in something that's just one. Or is the surface has a oneness about it and a heterogeneity
See,
about
this
it.
is where your brilliance is now starting to show in ways that you didn't realize. Okay. Nick has very conveniently moved us into Lyotard.
Oh, I do apologise for that.
Shakespeare group meeting.
What's that now?
Is this it?
Is what?
Shakespeare group meeting.
No.
Many things.
This is the Untimely Meditations.
Yeah. Oh, I know. No,
Okay, enough of the rhizomes. It's like, I think, you know, maybe you should lock the door, Tom. Right, okay, let's try this again. Nick has very conveniently brought us to the moment of Lyotard. But before we go into the moment of Lyotard, let us understand what is at stake. What is your complaint? I mean, like you're complaining. What is the thing that you're pointing out as an issue?
Well, simply the sort of coexistence or the contemporaneity or something
Heterogeneity.
of heterogeneity on the one hand, but the surface.
It's the word
The ground, you know, which I know grounds also can be sort of quite complicated, but refer to it as the ground, as though it's a single thing.
Okay, or even groundless ground.
Yes.
Yes.
But I mean, in my way of understanding it, one calls it a surface because we are thinking within this visual metaphor of the ground as in the set of axioms or the foundation which supports sense. And in the case of the rhizome, it does not point to anything outside these heterogeneous combination of elements that becomes an assemblage, to use the word.
Yes, important word, assemblage.
So it is a combination that interacts out of elements that are heterogeneous in the sense that they were not necessarily meant to be together, but they find ways of exchanging, which might be ephemeral, temporary, or more lasting. Therefore, something becomes repeated and something takes place. So there is then a general color to it, or a general hum to the buzzing thing.
And so, for example, you see these pieces of paper here, these little pink pieces of paper. We could have having just a couple here and a couple over there is one thing, but if we had it thrown all over the room, you would probably, or I would certainly, think, someone's trying to do an exhibition somehow, or there's some sort of so-called art going on here, or somebody's done an intervention, or B, someone has messed up the room and they haven't made it neat and clean, right? I would think something had happened, something had intervened in this surface. So the other thing you have to remember is that the surface holds as much as it holds, and then it doesn't. And it sounds very Zen here, but too much of this, or of the Diet Coke, well, too much of the Diet Coke anyway, is going to make it not work, or make it work differently. So that's the next point. Well, there's 2 points here. One is what Mattia has very rightly pointed out, which is that at some point, this conglomeration of things that don't necessarily have to go together, but they kind of do go together, and as a result make a color, make a energy of some kind. This energy, which is heterogeneic, see, look at all of us, all the separate beings in the room, come together to form this thing, a surface, and Nick was saying, well, why does it have to be like the ground or the surface? Because that surface creates meaning. Or as Panos was saying, it makes sense. It literally creates sense. But you could have too much of a good thing, and it won't work. It won't make the sense. It will make it spill over. What I want you to understand is when it makes the surface has an edge that is, let's say, a whole edge, or a one, or a unity, but the unity isn't a real edge. Because really, what's the edge of this room? I mean, is it literally the 4 walls? Not necessarily. I mean, when there's a group of us that were in the article gallery, so part of the seminar had kind of slurped over there. And I don't mean just because there were about 3 or 4 people that were there. There was an energy. So it was this kind of weird flow. And that came back in when it was time to start the class. So in fact, what made this have a boundary was the fact the class was starting, not the fact that we're trying to see how many people could fit into this room. So it was time that gave the edge to this. It was knowing that we had to be in a place at a certain time. So that's the first aspect, that the surface's edge is considered a unity, but only a unity from the cohesiveness of what gives it its color, what gives it its tone, what gives it its sense. And you could have too many pieces of paper, like I said, or too many things of Coca-Cola, where it would start looking a little bit, in fact, it's getting almost on the edge there with all that paper over there.
Can I ask a question?
1 second, you can't ask a question yet, because I just want to press it on to this one other point, which is that when you have the extra thing that pops in, and when it starts to make the surface not work, you've got a nodal point. You've got something that's come in and shifted the surface. So think about it. You have all these things, and you are part of these things that are in this thing, the famous thing called the surface, which we now know is a unity, but it's not a unity that has an outside that closes everything in, but it's a unity that operates so that its edges form what is the is. And then you had one thing too much, and it shifts it. Now, it might shift it in a way that you like, and you think, wow, that looks good, I think I'm going to go in that direction now. So the nodal point that comes in, or what Deleuze Lyotard call the segment. So there's a lot of heterogeneic items on here, but you could have one too many, or something else comes in and it doesn't fit somehow. It just doesn't quite work. And when that happens, the surface shifts. It goes in a different direction. Now you can ask your question.
Johnson.
It might help as an example, thinking of an ecosystem.
An ecosystem,
Yes.
yeah.
Although conceptually the rise of chronology comes before ecology was formulated. An ecosystem is in equilibrium. There are these many animals, these many plants, these many people, and they produce enough food not to destroy the system, but to survive. And then one year, too many flies come up, and they eat all the flowers, so there is enough fruit, and everything
Clearly
loses
not a
balance.
gardener.
And
The flies are eating the flowers.
Whatever. And they go off, and
Whatever,
the
don't
thing
confuse
loses balance and becomes a different kind of equilibrium.
Right,
The ecosystem changes, no, it's no longer good for one kind of animal and another one comes in, or another one becomes dominant. But it's not reflecting a model that existed before. That's quite important in this concept. So, what it, nature, when we're speaking of global warming, for example, just to go with the example even further down this line, we are not thinking of a bad equilibrium. Global warming will be an equilibrium like any other, would be bad for us, but not as an equilibrium, because it's not it's not fulfilling a model that exists. It's just trying to find a balance with all the things that are there. And if they don't find a balance, they keep precipitating until they find some balance down the line.
right. And so, and here you can see, like in this room, we'll go back to this, because this, I think it's a good example of the ecosystem, but this, what we have right here is not a system. What we're having in this room. This is simply a surface that holds together because it does. But I'm thinking to myself, start looking from this perspective, oh, it's a shame that we've got all this paperwork on here. This is the student's work. It shouldn't be on that part of the table. What should be on this part of, what should be there, that should be over here. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's things that have to be put away so that you can still, so that the surface can still breathe. So you can still have room in your surface. Something like that. So any one of you could alter the surface. It's not just me that decides I'm going to alter the surface. Each of us have a role. It may not be an equivalent role. Maybe that because I'm at this end, I can see I have a different vantage point, and my vantage point gives me a better vantage point. So it's not that everybody is equal in their ability to shift the surface, but any one of you, including me, can shift the surface. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
My question is, how is really, is it what is the principle of identity? The difference, the
So
unity?
close. Yeah, can you figure out what is behind your question?
I mean, we have been discussing about this with James today, about the example of with his work,
Yes.
and I kind of realized that the heterogeneity, it was all the elements that were there, for example, the projector, the tripod, James, his voice, everything,
Yes.
that created the framework that was his presentation. But
It didn't create the framework, it created
it was,
the surface.
yeah, it was the framework.
No, it wasn't the
Okay.
framework.
Okay.
Anyway,
but
let's park that. Yeah, go on.
It had,
It created whatever, X.
yeah, it had a meaning. We had a meaning.
You know something? Instead of calling it framework, why don't you call it place? You created a space.
Okay.
So I'm using the word surface for space.
Okay.
You're using the word framework for space, but it's a spatiality that's being
Okay.
created.
But at the same time, each of that element was itself.
It was itself.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I quite understand that difference is because it's this unity. But I followed from identity's difference, unity with difference.
From Heidegger. Yeah.
From Heidegger. So I drew from that difference in unity,
Yes, but
created
in
the identity.
Deleuze, difference, or what he will later call radical difference, which happens to be question 1 on your essay, anyway, is not about unity.
Okay.
So we're almost there to understand what it's about.
Mhm.
So just remember that part. So Nick has correctly pointed out a problem about this thing called the unity, which we thought we had escaped from once we left metaphysics, or once we left dialectics, rather. Now, Panos is correctly saying, oh, wait a second, this seems to be bringing back this question of unity, at least via difference, right? That's what you're asking?
Yeah.
So just park that, yeah.
So is that the emergence of too many pieces of pink paper or coke cans or whatever, that's what the start of deterritorialization?
Yes. But it's also to say that deterritorialization also is this surface, because it's not, it's a map, but it's not a map of anything. It's something, it's a cartography. It's the graphing of a way in which something is put together and made to belong.
And also,
Sorry.
I believe it is important here to realize how once one tries to move away, once one moves away from the unity as a start, as a first stepping stone or ground, the idea of space, of extension, has to yield to the idea of time. So a surface is a place as long as the things that are playing in it keep playing together. So time comes first. And in this sense, so when we mentioned the deterritorialization in it, it is when, not where, but when, some of these combinations starts changing.
So it's the when, and that's time.
And in this sense, it is difficult to define the limits
Yes.
of the room,
Right.
because the room does not have a geographic limit. It's when we have to go.
Yeah. And in that sense, it's not just time, but it's actually timing. It's the gerund. The gerund form is an ing, for everybody that doesn't remember their grammar. So ing is becoming, moving, pardon me, timing. Now,
I have a question
yeah.
about surface here. And
Yep.
it looks like it's changing all the time because we do something to it.
yes,
And what about surface of painting? Because this is quite
static. Yeah.
Yes. Is it about how can you discuss it then? Because I understand that the surface is changing quite a lot.
Mhm. Good.
And there you can only discuss it in relation of
So,
language of painting, really.
so
Like
that
tones,
is such an
drawing.
important question. So anybody have an answer to that? Anybody want to take a stab at it?
I think that when we engage with the painting, it's kind of form another surface, or so immediately.
It's a process then. You can call process
No.
surface.
No,
then.
I mean
When you
surface.
engage, or you engage as a viewer, you mean?
No.
As an artist,
When
or
one
as a viewer?
encounters it. It's
Yeah.
not really an engagement. But let's just take it as, let's just take the hard question that you're asking, which is that if we're talking about this environment here, like the notion of environment and so on, I'm trying to get you to think of what is a surface. And that's why we use this example of how the surface works. But that painting is also dynamic, even though it's not running around the room, or it's you know, it looks just like that today. It'll look just like that tomorrow. I mean, maybe there'll be more dust on it or something like that, but basically it'll look the same. Or you can go to, I don't know, the lions in Trafalgar Square. They'll look exactly the same as they did 200 years ago. So, more or less. You know, so I'm trying to get you to understand how something has a surface, and that surface is what gives it its meaning. So, when you asked what is the surface of the painting, you immediately decided that it had to be physical. Remember, that was your first response.
Yes.
Well, do you mean the physical surface?
Mhm.
But nobody said when I said, well, what's the surface of this room? Nobody said, well, do you mean the physical surface? Everybody kind of on some level understood that the surface was the atmosphere. But by atmosphere, one didn't really mean the air, although you could mean the air. By atmosphere, one meant the fact that it has a way in which it all comes together to make this place happen. The same thing can be said about the painting. Painting, yeah.
Is it possible though to divorce the painting from the room? I mean,
Yes, just like it's possible to take any one of these things out.
but then they
Including
become
yourselves.
something else. Don't
Yes.
And I believe it's very important what you say, it becomes something else, does not become the opposite or a part of what it was part of before. You don't, it doesn't retain his communication to it once it's no longer playing with it.
We're talking about what is the surface of the painting as though we didn't exist.
No, but that's what Panos was saying, that the relationship to it is part of the encounter.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So surely.
But the painting exists whether or not we encounter it.
Yes.
Like
Yes, exactly.
with the famous, you know, if the
Exactly.
tree falls in the
It's-
forest and no
Yes.
one heard it, it still fell.
It still fell. Yes.
Okay,
But also beyond, I mean, in the case of the painting here, what I bring to it in trying to figure out what is happening in the painting and responding to the style of the painting and the realism of some part and the non-realism of other might not be the same kind of information that David brings, you bring, or anything, or anything. So we might recognize some things and then other would be different. So we add and or not add in different degrees different things to it. So already the painting is not a fixed, static set of information.
No,
So the
that's the point I'm making.
Yeah.
So if you put it in a box,
Mm-hmm.
so no one could see it, it would still have a surface. But that's what we're saying. But it would be obviously be.
okay, we're gonna try another one. This one. No. That's smaller to look at and it's not obvious what it is. Okay, so now we have this piece of work. Now, this piece of work was is the work of Jez Dolan. Thank you. Did I just get it wet?
Okay. Not the
Lose
painting.
that? This, now, Jez, you handed this in as a book review.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what was the book review?
It was about what is art by Joseph Boyce.
Right.
Conversations with Joseph Boyce.
Okay, and this isn't the answer, this is the same point,
Yeah.
okay, as the writing. Now, what was the writing about? What did Boyce say?
He took in the book. It's he talked about his artworks being artworks which were objects and artworks which were processes, and part of the process-led artwork was his pedagogical work. So working with other people, working with students, working with us, whoever, to talk. And he talked about materiality and process, and that in terms of what I've been thinking about, if we talk about the role of the artist or the role of art of being attunement, that seemed to fit really well. What he was talking about, listening to the material and waiting for the material to speak to the artist.
Okay, so yes, so when you look at this piece, the reason I'm showing you this piece, or we could have used Julie's piece as well, can you just look? When you look at these two pieces, Julie, can you just say what book review this went with, what you were, this is Julie's piece.
Took the small piece of writing by Foucault at the beginning of Anti-Oedipus, where he was describing the ways to lead a non-fascist life.
Right, so this is Foucault's text expressing the moment of a non-fascist life, right?
Yeah.
Now, the reason they can both get away with that, And the reason it's a lot harder to see it in that one, because that looks like it's telling a story. There are people in it, there's a baby with wings. Even though that's fanciful, it does seem like something's being said, apocryphal or allegorical or something is going on in that one. And that's stopping you from understanding how the surface is operating. It's much more obvious, I think, maybe it's not as much obvious, in these two works to understand how they are dynamic. They're not static, these pieces. They're both moving. Now, they're not moving around the room, obviously. You would be on some interesting LSD. They are moving somehow. Can anybody explain, including the artist, how this moves, even though it's just sitting there? Yeah.
When no one likes the word subject, but if we call that a subject, then because everyone encounters it differently, but in the same space, the space we can call a surface, but at the same time everyone's encounter is also a surface, and so there is a plurality that the object creates, because it has a multiplicity. Yes, the object is the same in and of itself, but it's dynamic because each one of us tries to interpret it differently. But that same trying to interpret is also the surface.
Good.
Yes.
Make sense or no? Forward brow or making sense?
I think that's what I was trying to say about.
Yes, but people
Painting.
couldn't see what you were saying because it was too. There was too many figures in it, in a certain sense,
Yes,
so it
but-
kept looking like it was saying something by itself, like
So it's sort of closed down.
it's closed down.
Yeah.
Murder.
Would you say murder?
Yeah, looks like she's eating the babies.
But I hadn't actually thought of that. Actually,
Yeah, this
Quite.
is just, when you look at this murder.
But it's also saying the story. That's the thing. You see it in gestures. You see
You think
it in
and start trying to
relationship.
figure out a story. Like you wouldn't
Does
say, looking at this, murder.
Yeah, this is murder.
You know.
No.
And this one is just like writing from not to right to left, from left to right. This is what I can see from here. Right, yeah. With a little bit of glitter.
What do you think, Julie?
Like Arabic.
She might murder
Yeah,
you.
this is murder.
It's a way to try and break out of static, because the essence of the text is multiplicity, surfaces, layers, dimensions, and that's where that led me. And it kept, in fact, I sort of started, I sort of remember the text, I was sort of going backwards and forwards between it.
Yes, good. So one thing, again, I mean, not to bring in our tutorial issue, but one of the things that came out of it was the fact that, maybe it wasn't in our tutorial, I can't really know. The idea that the notion of conceptual art implies that it's speaking about or expressing a theory, or it's abstract, something like that. And that's why it's very difficult to understand conceptual art when you look at figures, because you don't realize all the art is conceptual art. It's not like this is conceptual art, but that isn't. Can you?
Of course, it's all.
Can you explain what you mean? Can you explain what I mean?
It's a little bit.
I read this differently. I read this, that speaks to me.
Okay.
This is beautiful.
Okay.
There's
Go on.
two figures. There is boldness, there's movement, there is balance. That speaks to me. I feel connected when I look at this. Yes, I look at this when I just walk in.
Okay. Go on. Thank you for the intervention. Okay.
The issue with conceptual art is that it's double. To reach what Johnny just said, we has to go through a bit, at least in my problem with it. Why is conceptual art needed to be defined as conceptual art, while if we encounter a painting, we just say art. We don't need to define it with something else. It's because there is an image attached to art, or an image of art that identifies with material production. And that therefore one defines forms of art that are not material production, or that are not the traditional material production through the usual crafts like painting or casting bronze, as something that is not the kind of art we know as art until now. So there is a negative definition. That's exactly not the surface, because it silences all the elements that are at play in something. The same would be for abstract art. In an age of visual, realistic mimetic representation, this would be taken as smudge, the leftover of cleaning a brush or something.
Yeah.
And it would take a while before these can break into the frame of art. And that's precisely combining these so much that this makes sense as is creating the tensions of the surface, which, to go back to the first question on Nick, now why we're caught between the heterogeneity of what plays in it and the fact that we say it is as if it were one, it is a unity. Going back to what I said earlier, to me the fact that the unity is temporal makes it a very, very special kind of unity, if we want to keep that word of unity. Because
Or if you want to keep the word when in there. Because I think the word temporal throws you when you hear it. It just sounds more complicated. So let's use the word when, so that you know that it's about time and timing, and that time and timing has something to do with distance, it has something to do with movement, it has something to do with speed, and what we're going to find out when we get finally to Einstein is that it has nothing to do with this thing called chronological, which is what often people think of as time. It has to do with space and poetics and a totally different scenario. But this is why we're taking time, as it were. We're going slowly to understand how the surface operates. First, by looking at the Deleuze and Guattari move, where they're talking about this rhizome that is both heterogeneic and spores, and then can make the surface so, let's say, overflowing that it breaks the surface somehow. Like, yes, what were you going to read?
they actually, on page 23 of the rhizome, well, there is a summary. There is a paragraph that begins almost at the top of the page that does summarize.
Page 23, yeah.
Let us summarize the principal characteristic of the rhizome. Like trees or their roots, the rhizome connects any point to any other point. And its traits are not necessarily linked to traits of the same nature. So basically, it can do whatever it likes. It brings into play very different regimes of signs and even non-sign states. And then here is the sentence I was pointing at. The rhizome is reducible neither to the one nor to the multiple. It is not the one that becomes two or even three or four or five, etc., nor it is a multiple derived from the one, or to which one is added as n plus 1. It is composed not of units, but of dimensions, or rather of directions in motion.
Okay, I hate to sound like a real annoying person, but you're on page 23?
Yep.
21 on the PDF.
Ah, okay. Sorry. Yes. Can you start it? Let us summarize again.
Let us summarize the principal characteristic of our rhizomes. Unlike trees or their roots, the rhizome connects any point to any other point. And its traits are not necessarily linked.
Are we all on the same page yet?
21.
21 on the PDF.
Sorry.
when you reread the first sentence again,
Mhm.
can you just explain what it means to say a rhizome connects any point to any other point? What does that mean?
Well, if
I mean, what does it mean in relation to the work? To this work?
is there a hierarchy to you within this image? Do you have to start from somewhere, and do you have to follow a specific line, or you can decide, you know what, I am actually attracted by this curve here, but then there is not 3 points. I see the number 3 developed with 3 points. Then I notice that this is much bigger. But you could start from here and build a different path through it. Or you can take the fact that there's a coarseness to it due to the specific technique for the print. Or you can start from the shade of grey of the paper and then go to the coarseness of the 3 dots. You can do as it comes to you. You can do as your attention is called to it.
And as it turns out, that's true for any work. It's just that when it's sitting there like images, it looks like it's directing you in a much more, let's say, authoritarian sort of way. Or maybe authoritarian is too strong, authority kind of way. So the painting is telling you how to look at itself, which is why there was such a break against figural painting, because people were going against, let's say, the non-democratic position that the painting was saying, look at me and look at me this way, like Dorota was saying, reading from left to right or whatever the story was. Look at me this way. Whereas both of these paintings, but we're gonna let's just concentrate on one. This is excellent. So
I knew that would happen at some point, don't worry.
thanks. It's okay, go on. Sorry.
So in this sense, we cannot look at this work geometrically as if to go through space from here to there. We have to go through each point in between. The in-between linearity does no longer work for this kind of work, because it's precisely this. Any point can connect to any other point. Even if it is an image that exists in 3D space where we are, it does not follow a Euclidean geometry of from here to Panos. There's the book, then my bottle, then the iPad, then the coffee, then the Nazi Spencer, and to get to
Dr. Spencer. Yes.
to get to Panos, I have to do all these steps first.
Yes. And that's why a lot of people, particularly in modern art and postmodern art, can't bear traditional kinds of painting, because they think you're being told how to look at it. And therefore it closes itself down. It becomes static. Now, good painting or great painting, no matter if it's an image or whatever it's doing, doesn't do that. Think about the Mona Lisa or whatever the story, I mean, just to get something in your head. You can look anywhere. You can start at the smile, you can start at the way the cloths go, you can start at the frame. All good paintings make you go into a rhizomatic environment, whatever they are, painting, sculptures, it doesn't matter. And when it doesn't do that, or the degree to which it doesn't do that, they're saying is invoking a non-democratic or a closed down ideological position. Yes, Panos.
Are you, since you are already going to approach an artwork, are you, because we have been talking about, for example, that artwork, what it does, but at the same time we are in a relationship with
Yes.
it. So it brings another rhizomatic
Yes.
change or something.
That's correct. Yes, very good. So if you go back to your sentence and you read it again, how come yours has a nice picture to it?
No, that's the photo.
Oh, I see, right. Oh, right, you're not looking.
So that's what was the connecting any point to any other point.
So now you see the 5,000 positions that are within that half a sentence. So basically you had to take the entire course to get to that little bit. Okay, go on.
And its traits are not necessarily linked to traits of the same nature. So it's not, the combinations are not based on an immediate or lay similarity. This is why the combinations are heterogeneous. It brings into play very different regimes of science and even non-science states. The rhizome is reducible neither to the one nor to the multiple.
Now, what does that mean? I mean, not just you, but what does it mean to say that the rhizome? So your eye is going in different directions. Let's say your eye gaze, the gaze of your eye, is the rhizome in this case now. So, what does it mean to say that it's neither going toward the one, nor is it going toward the multiple? What does that mean to say that? How do you hear that?
Is it like just taking in the whole thing? Rather
Yes,
than...
great, good. But taking in the whole thing, which is itself heterogeneic. And we do that as a matter of course. I mean, you're not thinking to yourself, I'm overwhelmed. Well, you might be overwhelmed by the table. I know the cleaner has been. She now has informed me that she's not touching anything on the table because she doesn't know if it's art or trash. I thought it was fantastic. I said, yes. Yeah. So, but normally, you can, this is one of the problems with cameras, for example. A camera often can't take in that kind of thing that one can take in by seeing it. So you try to paint it, you try to do, but this way in which one can take in the heterogeneic moment. As it's a moment, but the moment is very stretched. You know, again, how long is this moment?
I suppose as well, if you're talking about the surface as more of like an atmosphere, yeah, you can't really break that down into units, can you? It is just...
Good. Yeah, excellent. So it's neither the one, nor is it a multiple.
In the sense that it's not the sum of its parts.
It's not the sum of its parts.
Sum of
Like
its
this
parts.
table and the seminar, the people sitting at the table at the seminar, is not just made up of the 7 or 8 or 10 people that are sitting at the table plus everything that's on the table. It's more than that. It's less than that. Sometimes it doesn't really have anything to do with the fact that there are people at the table on one level. It has everything to do with the fact that there's people at the table. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact of which people are at the table. It doesn't matter that you're sitting here. Well, in your case, it matters that you're sitting here, so that's where you sit. But a lot of people, minus David, sit at different parts of the room. It doesn't really matter. Panos, you sit at that point. Yeah. Panos and David are our anchor points. Yeah, it's like, yeah.
But also you can think of when a book or a movie or an artwork, when one can very easily read what the intention was, and once all the elements are combined, and you read it, and it's got one reading only, and you see what it wanted to do, and someone say, oh yeah, good intention, but it just stays there because all these elements are just producing one sum. It's static, and it is not really going anywhere. But the other times you encounter something, and encountering is a very key word because there is an element of unexpectedness in it. Not because it surprises you, but because what it does is not the immediate sum of all the elements that are there. And obviously one brings to it as well. So then the artwork works, and you can keep going back to it with renewed questions, and you never exhaust it because you can keep looking at it, for example. While a painting, if you're thinking visually, if it doesn't really work, you see it once and then it becomes boring. It's a visual illustration, nothing else.
And that's if someone ever accuses you of doing visual communications, you've been wounded. Because what that is saying is that you have only one reading. You're directing the reading to be like X, like whatever it is.
In case of painting.
In the case of anything, any form of art.
Visual.
So this is why Duchamp is so important here, because in his site-specific and his putting the urinal in the gallery and whatever, but it was like, well, is it that it was in the gallery, or I could have done that, I could have found my Coke and put it in the gallery, and now we have another thing. Well, actually, it did matter that once that environment shifted, that he enabled, by doing it this way, it enabled people to completely see the movement of that piece. The piece itself was moving. It didn't, sometimes he was trying to play around with that with the wheel so that people get an idea that things moved. But it didn't have to have the actual move. I have confused looking faces. Is that because you're confused or because you desperately need a break? which is it? Yes, before we have a break.
When you sort of, I don't know what you do, you attune to a surface?
Yes,
or
good,
tune into
good.
a surface, and then you have that sort of moment where you're part of that surface.
Yes, great. Yes.
I think that's why I still had trouble with putting Emily's painting in a box, you know, and saying it's still on the surface, because it needs someone to be looking at it.
Yeah.
in-
So
in
there
order to
can't
have
be a surface
surface.
without conscious beings. Yes. But you need a conscious
That's the
being.
Heideggerian position, but the Deleuzian position is it doesn't have to be a sentient. It could be a mountain, like Stenger's talking about a mountain. You give it presence.
Okay. No, that's not okay. Doesn't make sense.
But you need interaction of some sort. If matter would be entirely static and solid with no atoms, with electrons spinning, it would just be one lump, then no. But as soon as there is possibility of interaction, you do not need our image of consciousness
Yeah.
and awareness to participate with.
Okay. Is it like the ecosystem?
It
Yes.
doesn't need to be witnessed.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. It doesn't have to be witnessed, so you could put it in a box if you wanted to.
There would still be a surface within that.
Why is
Surface
that
is
not?
in the box.
That's right.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because, like, for example, we know that this environment has a surface.
Yes.
We're in the surface, we're on the surface, we're at the surface, we're near it, however you want to put it. And we make up the surface. So we're part of this surface.
Yes.
But once somebody else comes in and looks in, they may not see this surface. They may not even have any relationship to the surface. So, but this surface can exist without that person coming in and wondering whether or not we're doing Shakespeare, whatever the thing
I
was.
mean, it sounds. I mean, the fact that we're looking at it and it's not in a box is a very different kind of surface to it being in a box.
Yes,
they're,
but
they're very different.
That's true.
That would
but-
be good. That's good enough for me. Yes.
Okay, but, okay, that's true.
But
yes.
it is also
But we're not going to let it lie.
I'm thinking of some old museums that are now disappearing because things change in time history, especially in Britain. Maybe not art museums. They had a neo-Gothic dust to them. The Albert and Victoria Museum in London, the cast rooms, where there are all the cast of various architectural styles from around the world. It's there even when it's closed, and it is gives a specific sensation between nostalgic and dreamy and absurdity, which doesn't go away when the museum closes at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
In that sense, the painting can be in the box.
Yeah, or in a museum or a gallery or whatever.
So yes, obviously, one experiences it in that case, but in other instances can be a relationship between chemical elements or the weather or.
Okay, no, I
Yeah.
got it down.
And who is deciding what is open or closed?
No one.
So is.
How?
Yes,
Oh,
it
it
is. Good. So it's making sense now. Okay, yes, but it's not making sense at this side of the room.
Not yet.
Emmerich, how are you hearing this?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just wondering. I don't know if it sounds a bit too simple. I don't know. I'm just. I
Don't you
understand
love?
it.
I love Emmerich. It just sounds too simple. Everybody's here like. Yes.
How
It-
good.
Yes, okay. Let's just move. Yes. No, let's
we'll
not
just-
move on.
No, but,
No, go on.
thinking of what Amrit wrote about when she last year about one of the questions, the memory issue of Nestor remembers.
Oh, that was great. Yeah.
Now, think of this. If you remember what the issue was with Nestor remembered.
Do you remember who King Nestor is?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Telemachus goes to ask information about his father, and King Nestor is too old and doesn't really remember. So,
But wait, hold on. It's from the Odyssey, from Homer. Just book 3.
A Greek.
A Greek, as opposed to an Italian or whatever it was.
So,
Yeah.
so, but he still replies and
As though he remembers.
and gives him element, and then also addresses him to other people that might remember something. Whichever way it goes, anyway, he just manages to give Telemachus enough questions, enough half information, enough possibilities, so that Telemachus doesn't give up. There is something there, and that something is not built by pointing out, I can tell you for sure that your father in November 2000, whatever before Christ, was alive on that beach, boarding the boats coming away from Troy. It's not that. That cannot be given as a certainty. But there is something else that builds enough hope for Telemachus to go forward. It's a surface that holds him up, but it's not the ground of the certainty of the proof.
So let's say that slowly. So the ground of the certainty of the proof is not required. You do not need to prove the assertion. So this is very much the basis of a lot of work in feminist work or in any work that challenges the status quo. People will say, well, how do you know it is different, or how do you know it should be different, or how do you know women really aren't hysterical? And then you go hysterical trying to strangle a person. But I say this. Anyway, the reason isn't because you're trying to prove it, because you can't prove it. It doesn't. I could say, well, look, women aren't like that, and then someone would say, well, actually, women are like that, and you're like, no, actually, women. So you just get this, boof, and then whoever's left standing is the one who wins. Okay, that was the old Socratic question, like, is it might versus right? I mean, how do you know that you're right? Well, if you try to ground it in apodictic proof, well, forget that word. If you try and ground it in a form of certainty that will be a proof, it's not going to hold. So all these scientists right now that are trying to find the gay gene, for example, or whatever it is that they're looking for in the brain, they will never find this gay gene. They will never find any of these. They will find things that will guide one way or another toward a cultural, sociological something, but they're not going to find the thing that says, or the criminal brain. Did you ever, I mean, I almost hate to tell you that I'm going to say this, but what was that film that horrible man Tom Cruise was in, Minority Report. So it's a very intelligent, sadly, it's a very intelligent film, despite the fact that Tom Cruise is in it. He's very good looking, and there's a lot of issues about that, but whatever. It's that position that there are. Anyway, let's not go there. In the Matrix, in the what's it called? Minority Report.
Book is better.
Anything. But what's interesting about that thing is that they are arguing that there is a criminal gene. That if you can pretty much go to the future or deduce in the future a crime that will happen given the following 76 things that can happen, it can end up on a certain crime, and so the person is arrested. They haven't committed the crime, they don't even know they're being watched, but they're arrested because if you follow the logic of proving that ground, it will be that that person's going to create that crime. End of story. So what this argument is doing is saying that actually there are truths that are created. It's not like there's no such thing as truth, or there's no such thing as, objective knowledge or neuroscience or any of that kind of thing. It's not to dismiss that at all. It's to say that when one understands this, it's precisely because it's not situated in a zero-sum game. It's not. I don't know. Maybe you could say it more. I have the feeling you're staring at me like.
I think you've explained that a few times.
Can we go on then? Are we able to go on to the next part, or did you want to just raise something before we go into Lyotard?
Could I just ask, I know you can't prove it in the sort of sense of a rational proof when you say it's zero.
Well, you can prove it in a rational proof, but it doesn't stick.
Yeah, but you can experience it, can't you? Because in the sense that it makes sense.
Yes.
That it can be real.
And it is real.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean...
so you can be satisfied. I mean, you may not have been able to tick the boxes of sort of a rational proof.
Well, today, for example, on Radio 4, don't know how many people listen to Radio 4 and admit it in this environment, but I listen to Radio 4. And today they had a thing on it in the morning, very early in the morning, on this woman from Saudi Arabia, and she was explaining, did you hear this? She was explaining how women are not oppressed in Saudi Arabia. And so the person was, who was interviewing her said, yeah, well, but don't you have to have a man wherever you go? And don't you have to be chaperoning? And, you know, if you're in prison, a woman is not allowed to get out of prison unless men will agree to take her back. And most men will not agree to take the woman back if she is in prison, because A, the woman doesn't have any sort of way to do anything other than be a weight on the society. So the woman kept saying, well, but that doesn't mean, you know, women are oppressed. It means that, okay, it's true that we can't drive a car unless a man was with us. In fact, we can't drive the car at all. And it's also true that, you know, but it's also true that there are 40 women in the parliament, and they could be in the parliament, but they're not, of course, allowed to say anything unless the men are back. And so it got to this really kind of crazy discussion. And I was thinking to myself, wow, this is just amazing to end up on the sentence, but women are not oppressed, despite the fact that you have this whole thing going on. And in the end, she said, but the interviewer said, well, but what about the idea that women aren't allowed to drive because there's the view that women are not good at, I don't know, braking, or, you know, or like distance, or having a sense of driving, or whatever the thing is. And the thing was, well, you know, some women really don't have a sense of how to drive. You know, they really don't have coordination, or something like that. So it's a very much like the Minority Report thing. So you're just already guilty before you've even gotten out the door, because you know that it's expected of the woman, or there are expectations of men too, so I'm not, you know, which are another set of things. But there's an expectation that that's what's going to happen. So might as well not have you put yourself in danger, or worry your pretty little head, or whatever the usual arguments are. You know, instead, we'll just cut it off at source. And so that's the same kind of argument that's rooted in a very specific kind of logic called arboreal thinking, or patriarchy, or any of these other things, where things are stuck in the ground. And what's happening here is an attempt to get rid of that. But it has very serious ramifications on art, on the political. Could you turn to libidinal economy? Now, the thing about libidinal economy that is wonderful, but also deeply annoying, is that Lyotard, Jean-Francois Lyotard, and please spell it Lyotard, not the tights that I wear. Lyotard was part of a group in the late 60s, early 70s, which was called Socialism or Barbarism. This was a very famous group with very strong personalities in it. There was a lot of discussion in this group around the role of the Soviet Union, the role of what is communism, what is art within this, and so on. And he became more and more disillusioned with the group. I think there was, when the Soviet, well, this is much earlier, but when they sent in the tanks to Czechoslovakia, there was a whole discordant view on this. He was opposed to certain aspects of Marxist dialectic. In fact, eventually the Marxist dialectic in particular became his passion to rethink epistemology without coming up with unities or totalities. And so we've placed him in this trajectory of where we're going with this kind of surface idea after Deleuze, although this is only pedagogically, it's not, they're really coterminous with each other. And it must have been quite a maddening time to have Foucault, Deleuze, Derrida, Kristeva, who else? Cixous, all these very amazing luminaries, all floating around, being played off against each other and actually playing off against each other, hating each other, loving each other, sometimes actually loving each other, and so on and so forth. So I put this in this context because eventually Libidinal Economy became what Lyotard referred to as his fuck you book. It's fuck you to everybody. I hate all of you. I've had it. I hate academia. Now you may find this someday that either in academia or if you're in the gallery system and you end up, hating all the artists you know, hating the gallerist you know, hating the system that you're involved with, and you end up writing something down or making a piece that expresses this total annoyance. This is the joy of this piece, of this book. It's also the irritation of it. Because he's writing it like, and if you don't agree with me, I don't care. Because I basically hate you. And so it's written in this really kind of angry fashion. Now, like I said, the good news and the bad news, same news. You can kind of see, if you write like this, how annoying it can get for anybody reading it. I should mention that. So you have to be very skilled at doing it. On the other hand, it's also fun to read somebody that is this annoyed and trying to still make the arguments against the socialism and barbarism group, or some aspects of the Freud teams, or Derrida, or whomever the various games and people that people were playing. When I first came upon Lyotard's, this particular book, he's written many, 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 many books. This is actually not my favorite, but I find it very useful for this part of trying to have you understand this thing that's not a layer, that's a dimension on a surface, that's not really a whole thing. He introduces two things that open up the mix here about difference, just what you need. One is how the sexual, the erotic, the raw, the dirty, let's say the morally suspect on whatever level enters the fray, just enters the picture. He is a very political man, so don't think he's suggesting that everything goes, that sexual assault and, I don't know, eating ice cream are the same value. He's not saying that. He's actually attacking the people that could not see beyond the behemoth varieties of the Soviets at the time. He was attacking those groups that could not understand paganism and the importance of having a very different way in against Christianity. He's attacking very specific kinds of Marxists who are orthodox, and he is also attacking Heidegger. He is, of course, also privileging Heidegger, the Marxist, the Freudians, all of it. So it's a very delicate read, even though he's angry. Is there anything you want to add to that bit?
No, not yet.
Not yet. So if you turn to the very first page after the Library of Congress page, so it says first published in the USA, 1993, and then there's just a page that has one sentence on it.
Yes. Who knows not how to hide?
Yeah, you want to read that really loud, Dorota.
Who knows not how to hide, knows not how to laugh.
Yes. Who knows not how to hide, knows not how to love. Okay, there's a lot of negatives in there. So if, another way of putting it, learning how to hide means you learn how to love. Now, before we even get into the book, what do you think he's talking about? Do you think he's saying that if you hide under the table, when someone comes into the room, that you will learn how to love?
We've encountered this before. He's talking about the secret.
Yes,
You said.
but he's doing something with this secret. And what is the secret? What do you think he's
So you're not.
If you can't keep the secret, you can't love.
true? But now remember when we encountered it before, we were doing fear and trembling. We were talking about, you know, the sort of this moment of having something that you can't express because it's not expressible. It's not able to be said. That's why you're not expressing it. It's not just because you're trying to hide it.
To protect.
No.
Bring
I mean,
in the humanity
no-
of it.
What's that?
You bring in the humanity of basically knowing how to be human is knowing the unknown.
This is not about hiding. This is actually opening.
This is not
It's
about
not
hiding.
hiding.
Yeah, so it's not really about hiding. Now think of the words we've thought about in the last hour, okay? So, can we change these words? Like, can you think of a word for hide? Who knows not how to, what's another word we can put in there? Conceal, okay, good. It's close. So if you did the Heideggerian read, who knows not how to hide, who knows not how to conceal, knows not how to reveal.
It sounds like he's saying if you can't put, not that you shouldn't, you need to learn to be in relation to things to learn how to be.
Very good.
Because
And that relation, yeah, go on. What does that mean? Just, how did you get that out of it?
because you have to learn how to almost put yourself away in order to make room for other things. So you have to almost deterritorialize yourself to reterritorialize.
Excellent.
And yeah, it's to be.
Yes, so we're going to push that a little bit further. So I was going to say there's a D word you have to come up with. So deterritorialization is correct. What's the other D word? Difference. So if hiding is a kind of poetic way of talking about the word difference, a person or a thing or an entity that cannot engage fundamentally or doesn't realize that they're fundamentally engaging with difference cannot get to the point of wisdom, cannot get to the point of what is calling love, friendship. What do you think of that? So he's not saying, so let's be very clear what he's not saying. You're in a deep and loving relationship with a partner that you've had for 5 million years. You go off and have sex with somebody, and you decide, since this is a monogamous relationship, if I tell the partner, that's going to be bad. So I'm going to hide this from the partner, and therefore I'm going to continue enabling love. Okay, he's not saying that. He's not saying, go off and have an affair, keep it quiet. Because otherwise you're going to protect or upset your partner of 6 million years. So make sure all the readings you can take of this, that isn't it. Now, I'm hoping that you now don't remember it as, I already said something about relationships. And so, that's not the takeaway from this.
Probably just stay with these first few words. The takeaway is putting it in relation with the title, 2 words. Libidinal and economy, because an economy has a very, very specific requirement, which is that of a transitive property.
Transitive. And what does transitive mean?
That everything must be possible to be translated. Sorry for the wrong sentence in English. It must be possible to translate everything without leaving anything behind. So there is also an eco of Adorno, no remainder here. Everything must be translatable into the next bit, into the word, into the currency, from object to concept. And so it is always summing up and drawing a very clear boundary around what is and leaving nothing out.
The economy is doing
the
that.
economy.
The notion of
But
economy.
if you hide, you withhold something from this translation. And that's precisely what saves us and allows us for a more genuine relationship, as Amri wrote down.
Right.
Otherwise, one is completely sort of captured without sort of. One is completely captured, is a technical term, by a regime that is in place. And then nothing is left. One is caught in the minority report and being sentenced before even acting. So it's the same problem as the deterministic line of events, the economy in this sense.
Felix, did you have a question? No. You just okay.
This is Foucault's exit, is it? It's sort of hide, sort of.
It's not quite the exit, but yes, it's an opening.
It's sort of keeping something.
It's closer to the Heideggerian move of when you think of A equals A, and you think of it being apart and yet wanting to belong. But in the economy, there is no A equals A. There is just the circulation. Oof, you've lost the A and the A. You just have the circulation part. If you just have the circulation part, how is that going to stay open? How is that going to manage its ability? And so one has to overtly make sure things stay open.
What it means with over to what it means?
One has to actively, because he's being very political here. You have to actively do something. It's not just standing around going, I belong? I'm pulled to Dasein. I'm not pulled to Dasein. You have to actively invent who you are. You have to actively create. The creating is not just going to happen with you just sort of sitting there smoking a cigarette. You have to actively do it. But to actively do it means you can't be 100% doing it. Because if you were 100% doing it, it wouldn't work. You have to hold something back. That's a very basic knowledge. I mean, it's much more complex. We'll get, needless to say, it's a lot more complex since we have an entire book to get through. Questions so far? Anybody else want to say anything about this knowing not how to hide, not know how to love? Helen, what does this tell you?
I'm a bit confused.
But what is, in terms of the not doing it 100%, hold something back, but then what is the,
Okay, let's put it like
what
this.
is the something?
Yeah, that's.
I come to the class here, and there's certain things I tell you. There's certain things you know about my personal life. You know that, for example, my youngest brother, suicided. You didn't necessarily need to know that, but you know it because I told you that a couple of times. And I tell you this because I want the stigma to go away. But I'm not really telling you a whole lot, because can you imagine if I came in every week and said to you over and over again, here's the situation, and by the way, I'm also thinking about getting a different chair on eBay, and I also want to do a couple other things, let me tell you about my life, and to sort of like have a fireside chat. At some point you'd go, okay, that's very interesting, but either I, meaning you all, want to have a fireside chat with me, or you're going to leave. If I just kept going on and just told and this and that, it would just be overwhelming. It would be so overwhelming, it would be underwhelming. You'd be underwhelmed. If you can't have everything given in order to hear what's being said, you can only get little bits. And even then, it matters. Or it matters just how little, because too little is not enough, and too much is too much. So you have to hold back. And I hold back, not telling you everything, not because I'm trying to keep it a secret, but because there's no point in you knowing, and some of the things I don't even know if you need to know or not. anything to add to that, or is there? Have I?
Maybe confusing or leading in the wrong direction, but if there is too much information about something or someone, some of the mystery about it or them is lost, and therefore the interest then is lost, and the generative power that mystery has is also lost.
Right, and so for those of you that are in a relationship for more than like 2 minutes, one that lasts over years, you have to keep the mystery. If you don't keep the mystery, ain't gonna work. You know, I don't know what everybody does in order to keep their little mystery afloat. You know, do you go on dates with your partners? Do you go, I don't know, one day come home with a totally different hair? Like what do you do? How does it work? You have to be, I mean, if you're 100% conscious on how you do keep the mystery alive, that's not going to work either. Because that will become a routine. You have to figure out, I mean, these are very, let's say, very easy ways into this at the moment, but I'm just trying to get you to think. I don't think it's taking it off piece to what you're saying.
Or also the setting off to make an artwork, having decided exactly how one wants to make it, will never make an artwork that functions.
Right, and why is that? Why wouldn't it, if you had it in your mind how a great opera or a great painting or great whatever acts is going to happen, why wouldn't that work?
There's always the element of the unexpected, so something happens that requires expectation.
But I mean, do you sit there going, oh God, where's my unexpected? Why isn't it happening?
No.
You know, I mean, like, how is it, again, like, how do you know when you have just too much pink coming in? Or too many Coke cans? How do you know when it's just, you just ruined it because you put one extra stroke in there and it just, didn't work? Or do you only know in hindsight when you've like added it and gone, wow, I ruined it. That's just great. How do you know? How do you know how to tame that enough that you can guide your artwork?
Sense of experience.
No.
Again.
Poor you. It's not just.
It's experience usually. In the beginning.
But what you get, the experience, as they often say, teaches one many things, but the main thing it teaches is that it teaches us nothing.
Intuition, you know.
It's not intuition either.
Attunement.
You're all Hegelians in the end. God, to break me down. Yeah, you come back to being the Hegelians.
I'll have a bash and I'll be a Hegelian, but never mind. There isn't any point in doing it all unless there is you get something more each time. There's the unknown, in other words, unless you're exploring. I know that's the wrong word. I know you don't like that word. But
It's not a bad word, but it's not really.
it's not.
So how do we counteract this notion of experience? You know, every time someone mentions it, like either intuition or experience, I'm like, no. So what is it then?
It's all part of this locked down rational approach, isn't it? The idea that you use your
Can
experience.
paint, you're right.
But when you're painting, you're not painting in that way. You're not painting with a rational approach. It's a bit closer to what someone said, intuition.
I think of it this way. I mean, sorry, I just talk over you.
No, sorry.
If you, I'll just go back to the title and what Mattia was saying. If you have a Libidinal economy, and I just think, if you think of sex as a kind of expenditure, you know, and I think of two things at the same time, which is annoying. But I think of the kind of woman that went and fought for the vote, yeah, and she was fighting for that for her family at home. That maintained. If she fought for that all the time, she wouldn't have been the mother at home. And then if you think of an economy where you expend everything, you give it all, you don't have anything to keep back, and then go into your talk about keeping the mystery, you know, kind of. Fuck it. Mid-coitus, you have to kind of, you have to kind of, when the arriving happens is always the anticipation. So you can't just give it all away, can you? There's always a process.
Wow. I just wasn't expecting that.
That was how I thought about it. But all about, because the word love is used in so many different ways. You love, but you also make love. You have the act of love. You give love, you receive love. So love pertains to a
What
number of
has to do
different
with
characteristics.
painting?
So you have to hide it. Because I was thinking of it, well, fuck it, it made sense in my head. Did it
Well,
make
They're
sense?
discussing a drop of pink on the painting.
No, it was all about. I
Reality.
know. I was going from what Mattia said, to be honest, and keeping it with what he actually said with the sentence.
I mean, what
You have to
does
put
love
the
have to do with
title
it?
again.
Doesn't love have something to do with painting?
It does.
Yeah. There's no reason to be mad at you now. So love has a lot to do with painting, no?
Yeah, but yes, you have to maintain a distance, otherwise,
But that's true of love.
yeah. Like, what's his name? What's his name? The one. Pygmalion.
Yes, Pygmalion, yeah.
He gave himself over to his paintings that he couldn't see anything outside of that, or his sculptures anything
Yes.
outside of it. So you have to be able to step back and know. I suppose no. Yeah. You just have
How
to
do you get love?
Maybe, just not to get sidetracked by the
By the love question, by the love train.
If we stay with the image of Minority Report,
By of what?
the image of Minority Report.
Oh, of Minority Report.
If anybody else has ever read it, We of Evgeny Zamyatin, 1920s Russian.
How many people have read this?
started.
You're kidding me.
What's it called?
That's fantastic.
I couldn't finish it. It's called We.
Read.
No, We. Is it with W-E?
W-E.
Yeah, We.
Yeah, okay.
The idea that everything must be completely visible from here to the furthest possible development. Proper determinism. One cause, there follows one effect, and nothing is lost. So there is an economy there. In Zamyatin's novel, this is presented visually with houses made in glass, so you can see what is happening inside, and then the power sees whatever individual does. And to stay with love, because it is a rationalized dystopic society, there is no courtship, there is no romance. You get a pink stab, and you sign up for somebody you might like to have sex with. If they accept your pink stab, you show up at a certain time, and that afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, you have your hour, then you go and then somebody else. And so pinks, and you exchange all these things, for example.
This is a metal.
That's one
Yes.
ticket.
Nobel. It's
Yeah.
called Nobel.
Evgeny, we.
We. Ah, we.
You said you read it.
No, Amrit says she read it.
So the transparency of it leaves no freedom for the individual of that society. And when somebody in the society starts realizing this is a problem, they are all lobotomized by the institution.
So it's a happy novel.
Oh, wonderful. These hiding and loving has to do with that. Trying to hiding from the all visible, all capturing economy that leaves no slack for change.
Yes, okay, there's a porn film that you should take a look at called Cafe Flash. I mean, while we're like in Lyotard, where it's called, it was done in the 70s or 80s, might have been somewhere in there. Anyway, it's called Cafe Flash. I'm sure you could find it on.
Yes, it's on YouTube.
Is it?
That's not how much I'm asking.
I know, but I didn't realize it was on YouTube. Anyway, it's a terrible film, but as most porn films are, which so it sort of stays in the porn film location. But what it's about, basically, is there's this cafe called Cafe Flash, where those people who have not, it's a real sort of obvious but porn version of trying to deal with the HIV crisis when it first came into view in the 80s. So it must have been in the 80s, this thing. And basically what it's about is those people that can have sex and those people that cannot have sex, because if they have sex, they die immediately. So Cafe Flash are for those people who cannot have sex that go and they watch people having sex, because the people that can have sex are not infected yet. Okay, but then it turns out that somebody who's having sex is infected, whatever. It has a minor plot, for a porn film. It's a very small plot, but but the reason it fits with what you're saying here is because it's the same idea. You take a number, you go in, you have sex on stage, or wherever you're going to have the sex, if you're able to have sex, and if you're not, then you take a ticket and you just watch, and then you have like a certain time, then you finish and you leave, and it's very perfunctory. It's very like, that's it. Now that, in that sense, is not, well, we can have a different discussion of whether or not it's love or not, but for the purposes of this discussion at this moment, and not to try and make it sound that the only type of love is romantic love, but what's being said here is that there's a certain kind of care, and a certain kind of respect, and a certain kind of, but I don't mean respect is too strong a word, it's a certain kind of friendship. We use the word friendship as opposed to respect. There's a certain kind of friendship that comes in the sense, in the form of sex. You don't have to be married to the person, you can have, an orgy, but it's a certain kind of sexual friendship that works as a friendship, works sexually as a friendship, if one has some element of, well, it's 5:30, let's just get this over with. If that's not what's on the agenda, if there's a different way, if a person has something else, I'm going to call that love, or I'm going to call it friendship. But what I'm talking about here is something that's other than, well, if it's 5:30, we can have sex now for 3 minutes and then we'll go. So it's a very different form of the porn. This is not to give porn sex a bad name. It's just simply to say that it's not the type of sexual encounter that is enabling. And so why we got on this topic is kind of interesting, but what I'm trying to get at, if we can possibly get back to it, is that the sexual friendship, you could have said as well, it doesn't have to be love, because that makes it sound much more romantically clean than it is. The sexual friendship is enabling, and if the friendship side of that isn't there, then it's not going to work. It's going to close it down. This is like the so-called problem, as it were, with certain forms of prostitution. The depravity of having sex in a situation where it turns out to be that nobody wins, as a certain sense, or nobody's having an experiences other than perfunctory. By perfunctory I mean just sort of very cut and dry, very cruel. There's a certain kind of cruelty involved.
What about the elderly couples who don't have sex?
Okay, I'm trying. That's a good point. Right.
I think
Different topic.
Well, not really, actually, because I would be willing to say that you don't have to be having coitus, as you were saying.
I'm a prude man.
You don't have to have that in order to be talking about sex. I mean, SM sex, for example. Many people who are involved with S&M sex never have sexual intercourse. It's not part of the thing. It's much more of a different environment, or tantric sex, or any of these kind of things. We will just park that for the time being, because I'd like to try and move it over to what we're getting at.
yes. How do you know? That's the question.
How do you know that you're having sex? I'm worrying about this.
You mean the tantric
I
sex?
think we've moved too far.
How do you know what?
How do you know that you need this pin and that much and in this place at the right time?
Oh, I see. Okay, so there are many things on the table right now. Let's try and put this into some sort of understandable moment before we get to the actual page that we're supposed to be reading. Okay. The argument here, what is trying to be put into this part of the argument is the way in which the surfaces, which are heterogeneic, don't work unless there's a sensuality to them. Okay. Now, the sensuality could just be non-bodied, holding hands, nodding at each other, or it could be SM rough sex. The key is and this is why I think they use the word love here, because it's meant to be a sensual, stroke sexual environment that creates an ability to just be. Now, if the painting doesn't have this form of love going on in it, the painting won't be able to emerge as something other than like a paint by numbers scenario. Something that is already planned. I was going to get into the question of has anybody ever had bad sex, and I thought that's going to really just take us really off. But it is something like that, yes.
Yeah, I was thinking, because thinking of how then the first chapter starts with.
Yes, we haven't gotten there. We haven't even gotten there.
It has got to do with the image that we have of ourselves, as in the self, the unity of the persona, which becomes constrictive, or has become constrictive, or is constrictive just because it is one image which is closed. So then there is a whole game of I am and each of you are separate, and there's an inside, outside, and before and after. And one very quickly goes back to that opposition of one and its opposite, and nothing else is left out.
Right, so we're going to try it one more time.
The problem Lyotard is addressing in the first chapter, with rather good, but the first chapter, the poetic image he uses addresses directly the image we have of ourselves, of the self, the body and the persona, as a closed unity, being the base, the ground for things to happen. And once you start with that closed unity, then immediately you are required to think in terms of inside and outside, of I and you and so forth.
And we're back to not being heterogeneic on the surface.
You know, we start with single points that pre-exist the game, as if we would be who we are if we took away all the attributes of our styles, of our speaking, what we've read, what we've been avoiding throughout our lives, the people we know, and we could still be person like that. That there would be a sort of solid core that could be stripped of all the nuances and the ephemeral moments we have had. And that ultimately, that always goes back to something and its opposite is a dualism that once combined leaves nothing out, and is the Hegelian economy that Lyotard is criticizing.
Vehemently, yes. So one extra point here, and maybe this will help. Up to now, when we've talked about identity and difference, we've talked about the way in which something belongs or something doesn't belong, or the heterogeneic surface, or any of this, it is without blood, it is without feeling, it is too rational, even though there's an attempt to be outside of the rational. It's still asking you to think these concepts in the dry, colorless way, and you're able to meet that, and you have done an excellent job, like your book reviews, for example, are excellent. You were able to see analytically this problem of the heterogeneity. Okay, maybe see in little tiny ways, but you kind of could see how this surface could have a plurality and could be heterogeneic. What Lyotard is doing is he's throwing in the mix now. He's asking you to think orgasmically, think the whole situation again, but this time think with your genitals, think with your sweat. This is going to have a very different move every one of us in this room has genitals. And every one of us in this room has some kind of sexual something, even if nobody acts on it. He's asking you to think in those terms, to think paganistically. What does that mean? I don't know what that means to think paganistically, really. I'm not a pagan. And so to me it's a metaphor. But the metaphor is to ask you, what do you need to do to get that head to stop overthinking and to get you to have your senses begin to organize the processes in a way that is not just crap. In a way that when you look at the work, actually it glitters, it pops. If you want that to happen, you gotta bring those genitals in there. You have to bring the blood in there. You have to bring the passion. If you don't do that, ain't gonna work. It's gonna be too stiff. It's gonna be too closed. It's gonna be too thought through. So we go back to this question of the famous surface and the ground. And you know now that the surface has got, if you're going to think about it outside of a metaphysics or outside of a dialectical move, you have to think that it's got heterogeneic aspects to it that are not closed, that have some kind of energy that holds it together, but lets it go splat, so that the splat bits, I'm not going to throw water any longer, there's too much on the table, makes a surface. And Lyotard is saying, if you can't embody the senses, all the senses, and the senses we don't even know about. So he's not just talking about the tactile, the touch, the smell, the sight, but he's specifically trying to get you to think with your genitals. And by that he doesn't mean to become this patriarchal idiot who is thinking, I must have sex with everybody the minute they walk through the room, and it's not a consensual sex, this blah blah blah. He's not talking about that. He's saying, as artists, think, put your brain in different spots, put your genitals in different spots. So he's not asking you to think via the crudeness of a bad form of aliveness. He's asking you to start moving it around your body. What would that do? What would that do to your work? If you actually allowed yourself the right to think with your body, your whole body. You know, so you can think of different artists that whose work tries to privilege that. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. I'm thinking at the moment of Jake and Dino Chapman, the Chapman brothers. I think sometimes I just can't bear their work. I mean, just I find it just so like. On the other hand, they're putting that forward as, let's just see where that takes us. Now, personally, I don't think it takes us very far, but I mean, it's like, but it does work. The work does work. It works very strong.
For example, Panos painting. I was
Yes.
looking at it last week and again this morning. And I was wondering, how did Panos get to start undoing the fabric of the canvas? And maybe it was a very rational decision, I don't know, but from outside is that very interesting jump where something that is not justifiable would make no sense a priori if you think of it like the canvas type. And yet, once it's there, with the painting and everything else, raises questions. And something has happened that is not, in this sense, the hiding of that sentence is not to be taken as in, I know there is something and I put it away, but I just let something happen without having to explain fully what is happening there. Something is passing by and is not named, for example. And that keeps the situation in a very unstable balance, so that it becomes interesting. And that's what we want. So the sexual is both metaphoric and real at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it must be taken in both ways. Other works, I mean, the sensual and the sexual is more directly evident. The energy.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I worry about talking about on the level. On the other level, I think that we haven't really talked about this. Even though we've been talking about Freud, even though we've talked about, I don't know, all this, where is the blood, the sexualness of things? Why fight for this? I mean, why should women in particular, I'm thinking about this, have fought for sexual liberation? Why even talk about the word sexual? The whole gay male female, I'm talking about the men at the moment, but it doesn't really matter. The fight to be sexual, what was that about? To be killed for it or tortured. Even the king, didn't he have one of the kings in this country? Didn't he have? He was
Edward II.
Edward II. He was sodomized with an iron rod. It's just incredible. A red hot iron rod to kill him. It's like, what are these people thinking? They're nuts. You know, but why is the sexual left out and yet so important that it's like the elephant in the room? Where is the sexual? If we're going to talk about the surface, and we're going to talk about all the other things that are in this room, and we're going to leave off the genitals, you haven't gotten there yet. You have to see the whole picture, because the whole thing matters. And it doesn't matter that you have to be jumping in bed with everybody every 5 minutes, or like having sex or not having sex. It's not about that. So in that sense, it's metaphor. Well, it's actually poetics rather than a metaphor. It's a way in which the sensuous is in the room.
And is not limited to a specific function.
Right.
Because otherwise the very image that the book opens would make no sense, because it would seem to destroy the sexual.
That's right.
And instead it's exactly the opposite.
So let us turn to that image. Now, it's a very harsh image, so I don't want to upset people. People have read it, so you should have already seen it. Before we do that, let's just look at, time flies when you're talking about sex. The thing about the glossary, I want you to make sure you read that glossary for next week. The shameless, immodest provocation is what we're going to get at. So the first thing we're going to look at is this thing called the great ephemeral skin. Lyotard is going to start reconfiguring this surface as a skin. So we're going to turn to page 1. Okay, who would like to read this aloud? Shall we have our reader?
Sure.
Okay, but now read it slowly and Academy Award-wise. What?
What was the last bit you said?
As in Academy.
Okay. Open the so-called...
Sorry, I'm on the wrong page. That's hilarious.
I'm on the right page.
No, I'm on the wrong page. Hold on.
Actually, I'll start with the subtitles as well.
What page is it?
Page 1.
Page 1. You're welcome to use mine.
Okay, there you go.
Watching.
Sure.
Okay. So it's chapter 1, yeah.
Opening the libidinal surface. Open the so-called body and spread out all its surfaces, not only the skin with each of its folds, wrinkles, scars, with its great velvety planes, and contiguous to that, the scalp and its mane of hair, the tender pubic fur, nipples, nails, hard transparent skin under the heel, the light frills of the eyelids, set with lashes, but open and spread, expose the labia majora, but also the labia minora, with all their blue network bathed in mucus. Dilate the diaphragm of the anal sphincter, longitudinally cut and flatten out the black conduit of the rectum, then the colon, then this sesame. Now a ribbon with its surface all striated and polluted with shit, as though your dressmaker's scissors were opening the leg of an old pair of trousers. Go on, expose the small intestine's alleged interior, the jejunum, the ileum, the duodenum, or else, at the other end, undo the mouth at its corners, pull out the tongue at its most distant roots and split it. Spread out the bat's wings of the palate and its damp basements. Open the trachea and make it the skeleton of a boat under construction. Armed with scalpels and tweezers, dismantle and lay out the bundles of bodies of the encephalon, and then the whole network of veins and arteries, intact, on an immense mattress, and then the lymphatic network, and the fine bony pieces of the wrist, the ankle. Take them apart and put them end to end with all the layers of nerve tissue which surround the aqueous humerus and the cavernous body of the penis, and extract the great muscles, the great dorsal nets. Spread them out like smooth, sleeping dolphins. Work as the sun does when you're sunbathing or taking grass.
Go on.
And this is not all. Far from it. Connected onto these lips, a second mouth is necessary. A third, a great number of other mouths, vulvas, nipples, and adjoining the skin of the fingertips, scraped by the nails. Perhaps there should be huge silken beaches of skin, taken from the inside of the thighs, the base of the neck, or from the strings of a guitar. And against the palm, all latticed with nerves and creased like a yellowed leaf, set potter's clays, or even hard wooden handles encrusted with jewels, or a steering wheel, or a drifter's sail are perhaps required. Don't forget to add to the tongues and all the pieces of the vocal apparatus, all the sounds of which they are capable, and moreover, the whole selective network of sounds, that is, the phonological system, for this too belongs to the libidinal body, like colours that must be added to retinas, like certain particles to the epidermis, like some particularly flavoured smells the nasal cavities, like preferred words and syntaxes to the mouths which utter them, and to the hands which write them. It is not enough, you see, to say, like Balmer, that the fold in the armpit of the child, dreamily intent, her elbow on the table and chin in her hand, could count as the folds of her groin, or even as the juncture of the lips of her sex. The question of counting as, don't urge us to ask it, far less to resolve it. It is not a part of the body. Of what body? The organic body, organised with survival as its goal against what excites it to death, assured against riot and agitation, not a part which comes to it to be substituted for another part, like, for example, in the case of this little girl, the fleshiness of the arm for that of the thighs and its faint fold for the vaginal slit. It is not this displacement of parts recognisable in the organic body of political economy, itself initially assembled from differentiated and appropriated parts, the latter never being without the former, that we first need to consider such displacement, whose function is representation, substitution, presupposes a bodily unity, upon which it is inscribed through transgression. There is no need to begin with transgression. We must go immediately to the limits of cruelty, perform the dissection of polyphormous perversion, spread out the immense polymorphous perversion, spread out the immense membrane of the libidinal body, which is quite different to a frame. It is made from the most heterogeneous textures: bone, epithelium, sheets to write on, charged atmospheres, swords, glass cases, peoples, grasses, canvases to paint. All these zones are joined end to end in a band which has no back to it, a Mobius band which intersects us because it is closed. Not because it is closed, but because it is one-sided. A Mobian skin which, rather than being smooth, is on the contrary, is this topologically possible, covered with roughness, corners, creases, cavities, which, when in passes on the first turn, will be cavities, but perhaps on the second, lumps. But as for what turn the band is on, no one knows, nor will know, in the eternal turn. The interminable band with variable geometry, for nothing requires that an excavation remain concave. Besides, it is inevitably convex on the second turn, provided it lasts, has not got two sides, but only one, and therefore neither exterior nor interior.
Okay, stop there. What do you think you just heard?
Surgery.
What's that? Surgery.
Surgery.
A surgery. Besides surgery. Was this just gratuitous violence? What was this that we just, I mean, this is a famous philosopher writing this stuff.
Well, the way it's written, it forces you to look at it in a very physical way. But it's looking at, just shoving in your face the fact that we are every part of us, not just kind of the head.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit Freudian too, because it's applying to the body, which is sexual and everything.
Yeah, every part.
The physicality.
What's that?
The physicality.
The physicality, yeah. What did you make of this, though? Emma?
What do you mean?
What, was it worth hearing it?
Yeah, because there's a lot of it that I didn't really hear the first time, like the physicality of the sensual.
Yes.
And how, apart from you being a body, there's you are all your senses, and the senses that, that smells, they don't exist. They're not material, but they exist within you and kind of on you.
Great.
That was interesting. And how it's just a mess. The surgery
It's just
is
a mess.
The surgery is really messy. You're
Yeah.
not. It's not done elegantly. It's just exposing you to the kind of mess of bone and muscle that is, and it's not really making any. It's not hiding that you're just a collection of things.
So, yes, Nick?
So I was just thinking to myself, what is his relation to Deleuze and Guattari? Because I'm not sure whether he's being very aggressive about them or supportive to them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, he's being very aggressive about Heidegger here. This is like the porn version of identity and difference. Seriously, this is where he puts life into this dwelling. This is where he insists that it must be more than just understanding negation in this kind of like general sense. That if you're going to fight for sex, you're going to fight for the body, then you need to step up to the plate to do this. You need to realize what's involved.
Also because the whole attack on the solidity and the unity, also an attack on I'm formulating this one, I'm going so slow, is an attack on that separation that in Western thought has always kept the mind and the rationality and the language detached from the senses, the body, the physical. And there was always an hierarchy in this separation. The two they were not on equal terms. So one of the things he is trying to do, together with undoing the unity of the subject or the unity of the concept, is breaking down entirely this separation that has kept the body as less important. So it begins from the body, and then undoes the unity of the body, and doing that puts the mind is all spread out. And I find it interesting when it says this is not enough. You need more. And there are not only all the bodies open up, the objects and concepts and things.
You start
all about.
living in. Yeah. And he's attacking Hans Belmar, and you notice that, so in the way in which Belmar often poses the little girl, and it becomes really sexist. It becomes there's a way in which it's read so that the so-called little girl, the purity of the little girl, the vagina of the little girl, where he's saying, okay, let's talk about these vaginas, let's talk about these penises, let's just open the whole thing up. What happens when we level it? Well, something happens. Something gets broken, something gets reformed, and suddenly you have a different game going on, which in another book he calls just gaming, by the way. But what were you saying?
No, regarding the Belmar reference,
Yeah.
there is a specific expression could count as.
Yeah.
Could have there is a French translation as well next to it. Could have the same value as
Yeah.
the force of a groin or even the genital for sex. That's precisely the kind of economy he wants to undo. That one thing could stay for another. Because if one thing can stay for another, two things are separate. And instead, undo this equal sign, and if you start from that, what you get. That's to me what is a very
He's
important.
breaking
pass.
down representation.
That makes sense.
It's the way he's writing it as well, because it sort of just goes on, like flows on and on and on. I'm kind of thinking, it seems to be talking about the surface as, kind of being fluid and not
Yeah.
sort of
Great.
not having those, you were talking about edges and boundaries before, not having that at all. It's kind of one big.
It's one big Mobius strip. Of which the Mobius strip I used to have on the wall seems to have fallen off somewhere. But
What escape means, why the, and he talks about the two-sidedness and one side being kind of indented and the other being,
smooth lumps.
lumps. Why? I don't understand. How does that tie into everything? Because he says, so there are two sides of it, but sometimes you might experience one and then the other, and sometimes you might only experience one depending on if it changes or not.
But he's talking about a Mobius strip. You know what that is, right?
No.
Okay. Where's my Mobius strip moment?
You can only draw it.
Okay. So. Okay. Okay, here we have a piece of paper. And if you look at the piece of paper this way, you notice that it has two sides. But he's saying that that's not what an economy is. Economy has one side, like a Mobius strip. So the way you get a Mobius strip is you fold it like that. You happen to have a stapler nearby. And I'm just going to do this so you get a sense. Now, this pen I know doesn't work. Does anybody have a pen that works? Yeah, the Bruce thing. So if I start here and I never lift my pen up, then so if I never lift my pen up off this surface, then it's always on the same surface. So I've now taken a two-sided object. Notice I'm not lifting my pen off at all. And the two-sided object becomes one side because I have now been able to draw this line without, there we go. Voila. Okay, so now if I then undo the Mobius strip, I never took my pen off, but it's on both sides. So he's created a singularity. Now, if you look at this very carefully, you'll see that some have dots, and sometimes these can be convex, sometimes it's just like what's on this table. If this table is an example of a Mobius strip, some of them have tall things on it, some of them have flat things on it, and it depends, but it doesn't depend on anything in particular. It depends on how the is gets established. Does that make more sense?
Yes.
You're saying that just to say it? Or does it really make sense?
No, I think it makes sense now, yeah. I'm not, I don't think I could explain it yet, but...
So just remember the Mobius strip. Okay, now, it's now 2 minutes to 9, so unfortunately we have to go. But we're getting there. I feel good that we've had our sex session. Very unusual.
All together.
Yeah, that's right. This day today was meant to be talking about the way in which these submissions, these drives, these curiosities become like lumps or striated aspects on the Mobius strip. That and what he'll start talking about, as what we'll get to later tonight when you're reading this, is the tensor bound. Is the way in which these points on the Mobius strip start making intensities happen, and the intensities then shoot things out in different directions. So just think about this question of tensor band, how something gets tensed, how intensities become the basis of creating a surface. So Deleuze is the encounter. Lyotard is going to be talking about intensity. Yes.
There's also talks about intensity. Is it the same thing? I don't think
Yes.
it is.
Yes. But it's just that one is using one to make the surface more rich. So in Deleuze's case, that's encounter, and less emphasis on intensity. Whereas there's still an emphasis on intensity, but for Lyotard, the encounter is the intensity.
It's the same. When you can read intensity, it's been the same thing.
Yes.
Both.
Yeah. Good.